Yeah, greetings. The few colleagues that they've returned. We're waiting for others to join. George, did you manage to grab a cup of coffee in the meantime?
Indeed, indeed. Fully everything inside there, a few eggs plus toast, so life is good.
Okay, beautiful. Beautiful. No, that's great. I'm glad you could refresh.
Thank you.
Our guests are here. It is afternoon in India. For us, it's still brunch time. So.
Yes. What part are you in, Nabeela? What part of India are you?
I am connecting from the national capital, New Delhi.
New Delhi. Ooh, I was in New Delhi. Yes.
Yeah.
So many years.
When was that?
Is it sorry, Nabeela, is it called New Delhi or Delhi?
New Delhi as well, but New Delhi is like the official name.
New Delhi,
When
yes.
Sorry, when I was there, they used to call it Delhi. When you asked the
Yes.
no, go Delhi.
The colloquial part is to just say Delhi. You know.
Let's just say Delhi.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
And then of course she's joined by a colleague Togy. Togy, which part of India are you?
I am based out of Bangalore in India.
Yeah.
Which is also a capital, but the tech capital.
Is that so?
Which capital? What's the name of the capital?
No, I was just kidding. It's called the technology capital of India.
Oh, the tech capital. Okay.
Oh,
No,
yeah.
the only place I know in this area, sorry, sir, the only place I know in India is Delhi and Bangalore and Hyderabad.
Hyderabad. Yeah, lovely. That's where I come from.
Oh, Hyderabad, yes. I know that place.
You must know about Bombay as well.
No, I didn't go to Bombay.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't go to Bombay.
But Bombay is also Mumbai, so I always confuse the.
Yes, Bombay was
yeah.
the name given by the British, and Mumbai has been the name for the last couple of decades now.
Yes. And then Kolkata used to be Calcutta.
Absolutely. Same logic.
You can tell, Nabil, that these colleagues work for global multinationals. So that's something to deal with your capitals, the finance capital, the tech capital, and the political capital of India.
Yeah, definitely. Which part of, I must ask as well, which part of South Africa are each of you connecting from?
Majority of us are in the, yeah. You can tell your city's colleagues.
Yeah, no, fine. I'm in Johannesburg with Sam here.
Well, George, let me correct you. I always say I'm in Johannesburg. I'm in Campton Park. I'm in the Isando area, which is outside Johannesburg.
All right.
I'm in Brits, Northwest Province.
Nice.
I'm in Johannesburg. In fact, I'm listening to this longingly because the last time I was in India with my mom was 1998.
Wow.
Oh, wow, 23 years ago. Wow.
Yes, it gives my age away.
And welcome
but
back.
we were more in the south.
Welcome, Mishti. Yeah, this is a wonderful conversation across the oceans. Welcome, colleagues. This is we're looking forward to this session by Nabeela, joined by Togy and Mishti, all from the OrgLens. We are looking at the topic, exploring interconnectedness, collaboration, and team effectiveness using organizational network analysis. We'll hear more about that. OrgLens, ODA, and COMETSA are associates, are partners. So we thought that we have here in South Africa a big network of associates, members, and friends, business friends, and colleagues of COMETSA. It would be wonderful to assemble this morning to hear about the tool and the organization, and of course, our partnership. So feel free to ask questions at the end of the session, but for now, I'm going to hand over to the colleagues, Nabeela and Mishti. Mishti, you haven't told people which part of India you are, so you came in the tail end of the conversation.
So, hello everyone, and it's wonderful to see you all. I stay in a place called Mumbai. I believe there is a restaurant in Johannesburg that where you get food from Mumbai. So what's the name of that restaurant, Sam?
They call it Mahatra. It's named after your province.
Ah, all right. All right. So yes, so I belong to Mumbai, and it's always wonderful to be a part of this forum and to meet and greet all of you. For those who don't know me, I am a partner at OD Alternatives, and I also co-host a show on applied coaching with Sam and COMETSA. And I will not take too much of your time. I would just hand it over to my wonderful colleagues, Nabeela and Togy, to talk about how we can explore interconnectedness through a very powerful tool, ONA. So over to Nabeela and Togy. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mishti. Hello, everyone. Very nice to see some familiar faces from just our interactions a couple of days ago. Hello to everyone that's meeting us for the first time. My name is Nabeela. I am connecting from the capital of India, New Delhi. And we're just 3.5 hours ahead of you. So it's about a little past 2 here. But we're fresh as a daisy, happy to spend the next hour talking to you. I work for a firm called OrgLens. Very recently, COMETSA has entered into an association with OrgLens to really use this as a part of your coaching, as a part of your people consulting work that each of you all do with your clients in South Africa and beyond. So what does OrgLens do? I searched and searched about some way I could tie it with something closer to, a philosophy that would be local and contextual. And the thing that comes to my mind is we just quantify Ubuntu for you. So that's a really tall claim, but I read up about, the whole African philosophy of the self being defined in relation to others. So it's a little bit of a departure from individualistic thinking and like focusing just at the, one person level. We all know that we are a product of our environment, that whole nature nurture debate. We are shaped by the people that we meet, we interact with. If only there was a way to quantify it and make use of that knowledge for driving decisions, that is what we do. So I bring with me, I've worked in the field of HR for about a decade. I've worked with organizations like Deloitte, SHRM, which is Society for Human Resource Management, Vistaprint, and I've been working for OrgLens for a little over a year. And allow me to introduce to you the co-speaker, Togy. He is the co-founder of OrgLens. He brings with him a little less than 2 decades of experience in HR and HR tech. And without stealing his thunder, I will let him give a detailed introduction about himself.
Thanks, Nabeela. Good morning, everyone. So like Nabeela said, I'm one of the co-founders at OrgLens. This is my second startup. Most of my experience has been in the area of HR tech, analytics, and product management. Currently, I head product development at OrgLens, and I'm excited to be part of this discussion and hope we can learn from each other.
Thank you, Togy.
All right. So friends and colleagues, like I was mentioning, a quick introduction about how we really go about quantifying. First of all, let's talk about the term that we think that we're measuring, which is social capital. For many decades, the whole management approach towards talent management, towards really assessing people, promoting them, or looking at what kind of development needs they may have, has been based on human capital approach, which is really assessing it at the human level, at the individual level. But we all know that we operate in a system where the kinds of relations we have, be it in our personal life or in our personal life, a professional life, it is bound to have an impact on how we operate, how we process things, how we perform, or how we sort of learn things. So given that the effect of the social has on the individual, if there was a way to measure that, analyze that, and make better decisions, that is the kind of work that we do. I'll just pull up a couple of slides, not more, I promise, but just to put this into sort of context. So like I mentioned, this is really actualizing the Ubuntu philosophy. This is coming from a base of the individual in a social structure is impacted by the structure around them. And in turn, the structure that he or she operates out of is also impacted by the kinds of skills, by the kinds of interactions that they bring to that structure. So if you are a part of a family that, happens to be very reserved, but you happen to have a very, very gregarious, outgoing nature, it is bound to have a rub-off effect on you, that you may possibly just have a slightly lesser gregariousness for the time being, and your family may also get influenced by you, that they may just sort of adopt some of your certain outgoing ways. Similarly, if you happen to be sort of, having a lot of friends who believe in the concept of remaining fit and exercising and working out, it is bound to inspire you, either to just keep up with the Joneses or to like have something in common to talk about and connect with. But it is bound to have you also inspired towards taking up fitness in a more serious and a more consistent way. Similarly, if you were also doing something, your friends might hear of it and say, yeah, sounds good. This recommendation looks good. Why don't we try it? We see it around us all the time. So if you're shopping on any popular e-commerce website, it could be Amazon or it could be anything else, you will understand that the kind of recommendations that come to you by that algorithm are driven by what your friends may have bought. So that's absolutely playing on the whole, logic of, if your friends or people in your first degree or second degree of contacts have purchased something or have liked something, it's quite likely that it will have an impact on how you may shape your choices and how you may shape your decisions. It could even be a travel website. You may have visited a certain place. Why do we inherently look for reviews from our immediate connections? That's because the way they shape also in turn shapes our worldview, and vice versa, of course. So this is what we do, except that we do this in an organizational context. So mapping the networks, mapping the kind of interrelations people have with each other in an organization, this is something that we do. We quantify it. This is an interplay of really complex, ever-changing relationships, but there are a lot of insights that we can glean just by quantifying, by assessing what those relationships could mean for organizations. So to sum up, social capital, we all are very familiar with the concept of human capital. But social capital, on the other hand, talks about what kind of resources, tangible and intangible, that are available to you at your disposal, and what kind of assets can you mobilize through that network. So it's the availability of resources, the wealth of information, knowledge, skills that you may have through just your network, and what kind of access you may have. And that access is determined by how strongly connected you may be to someone. How often can you actually go and seek help from them? So social capital is how can you really, leverage that potential of knowledge, of skills, of all these assets, which you derive from the people that you interact with. Let's take us back to the real world. Let's see how this really plays out. So for those of you who've just attended this, last week, you'd know that I just play a quick quiz and ask, who is this person? Do we recognize him? Do we know who he is? And I
No
bet you
idea.
it's something that you use on pretty much on a daily basis.
I have no idea.
No, okay. He is one of the co-founders of YouTube. And he happens to be a part of what has been now, been termed in the tech circles as the PayPal mafia. And I'll tell you why. So this guy, along with Steve Chen and Chad Hurley, were in PayPal at the same time. There were colleagues there. They knew each other. And they started YouTube, but they were just toying around with the idea of figuring out, should it just be like a video hosting service somewhere, a place where people can just record and store their videos, or should it be something that could be forwarded around? So obviously any idea goes through a lot of pivots. And they, along with their friend Keith and venture capitalist Roloff, they all work together. So they're all a part of the PayPal mafia. So they got in touch. These venture capitalists gave them access to, investment capital to the tune of about $3.5 million. And of course, the rest is history. So eventually Google bought over YouTube for $1.5 billion. So the whole point being that, this incredible story is not just about how genius and innovators love company and how they cluster together, but it's also about how these individuals who are plugged into a certain network, and they happen to work at the same company, but they also managed to keep in touch after they moved on from PayPal. So this kind of web of relationships had such a dramatic effect on not just their own careers, but also it spawned off an entire tech industry. So as you can see, the names that just about 25 to 30 of these people founded are some of the biggest names of unicorn companies that all of us have either used or definitely heard of or come across. So you have names like Airbnb, Udemy, YouTube, of course, Tesla. Elon Musk happened to work at PayPal as well. So he's from the PayPal Academy, so to speak. Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn. So all really house another really big website to do with architecture and design. 21 Inc., that's another media company which writes on startups. So you can imagine the kind of, about 400 plus startups that were birthed and all in the really big tech league, just because of the kind of innovation and clustering that happened in that Bay Area, in the San Francisco West Coast area of US. There is a very similar story which happened in India as well. The Indian tech media likes to call it the Flipkart mafia. So again, there was a bunch of people who started a very Amazon-like portal called Flipkart in India. And about 25 to 30 of them have in turn spawned some 200 plus startups in the Indian ecosystem. So again, the fact that, when similar-minded people converge and diverge, so there's a bit of convergent thinking happening, that there is sense of familiarity. They know how to process information amongst each of them faster because they've shared some common times together. And then there is also a bit of divergence. You see that these people brought in some sort of divergent thinking that they hadn't worked together, but they were able to shape their ideas and take it to some sort of fruition. So that is what innovation loves. A bit of convergence along with a bit of divergence, that you have the tools, language, and the frameworks to really come together to a common point. But you also have a bit of divergence in terms of access to new ideas, new people, new and novel information, which could continuously tell you, hey, what's new out there? How can you really better an idea, or how can you come up with certain new thinking rather than just getting stuck up in an echo chamber of very similar-ish ideas? And again, just to elucidate in the real world, how do individuals and their choices get impacted? So there's a famous study about how obesity is actually, you're much more likely to be obese if somebody in your first degree of connections is obese. So the chances of it actually goes up by 57%. When it's your own sibling, it's as high as 40%. And if it's your spouse, then the chances of you being obese goes as high as 30%. Similar study goes for smoking, that if you happen to have friends who do smoke, it's 60% more likely that you will. And the reverse is also true. So if someone in your close circle is quitting, it's 34% likely that even you will quit. So you see the whole sense of how we tend to get impacted by the people and the choices they make. on Einstein as well, in popular culture, really spoken about as a lone individual genius. But even after 25 years of having taken out his brain, put it in formaldehyde and try to study that what are the kind of patterns and convolutions in his brain that would have led to some genius, there was no conclusive evidence which would have proved that yes, Einstein's brain patterns were any different from that of any other human being. Even if they were, there was again no conclusive evidence to see that whether they were there from the beginning itself. Was he like born with them? Did he inherit that? Or did it come through sustained application of solving complex problems in math and physics? And therefore, his brain's patterns which are associated with spatial intelligence or with solving complex problems, did they get stronger and stronger? I mean, ultimately, it's a muscle. It depends on how much you use. So the latter thinking is more aligned with learned intelligence, with the neuroplasticity of the brain. The fact that how you are and the kind of interactions you have, the kind of learning that you have once you grow up, it can be changed. There is that hardwired thinking which can be changed. So your structure can definitely impact how your life can play out. Another very famous study talked about how only 80% of our fitness and our health is determined, only 20% of our fitness and health is determined by genes. The rest, which is a big chunk of 80%, is in your own hands. So how your health plays out, you may have inherited certain, diseases which may be running in your family. 80% of that is in your control. The way you eat, the way you exercise, all of that can be changed just by the kind of lifestyle and eating habits you follow. So a lot to learn out there. And at this point, I just want to ask Togy. So why is it that we have been following the human capital way of looking at assessments and looking at approaching talent management? Why haven't we adopted social capital so far?
That's a good question, Nabeela, and that's a good segue to the next few slides, right? So a lot of management thinking even today is to a large extent influenced by the American approach of individual excellence, right? Everybody is pushed to reach their maximum potential and to see what best they can deliver to the organization. And that concept is definitely valid. Yeah, I think someone just made an observation about Western influence. I think that was on the money, right? So while that concept continues to be valid, the fact that human capital in itself is not enough because what your capital is can be multiplied by 4 or 5 or 6 times, depending on where you're positioned in the network, right? And when we make that statement, it's quite intuitive, right? Because you see that, somebody who is good at networking generally makes better progress at work than the others. And that's the social capital that we are referring to of the individual, right? And if you take 2 people, both of them equally qualified, and both of them are in different organizations, right? One is in an organization where he or she doesn't get a lot of chance to become visible to the leadership teams or become visible to the rest of the organization. Her growth will be limited, right? But if it's an employee working in an organization which encourages cross-functional projects or which encourages exposure to different leadership teams, in that case, she would grow significantly because she's in a structured way allowed to enhance her social capital over a period of time, right? And that's where social capital is becoming more and more important these days. So that's one element. The other element is the amount of complexity that we are seeing in organizations, right? It's no longer enough for one subject matter expert to create a really good product or a really good service, right? You need people to come together. And that's where social capital matters as well, right? So that's where we transition from focusing on individual excellence to excellence at an organizational level. And that's where social capital is important. Right. So if we can go to the next slide, Nabeela, right? So just to give a sense of, so now that we've spoken about what social capital is, right? And why it significantly enhances the individual human capital. I'm sure the next question all of you must be thinking of it is, okay, how do we go about leveraging this concept, right? How do we measure it? How do we enhance it, right? So from the context of what OrgLens does, what we do is something called active ONA, where essentially we leverage a survey-based data collection to get a sense of what does an organization look like as a social graph, right? Now, the social graph can have many flavors to it. One is it can be a social graph which shows about the network of mentors, right? It can also be the network of experts, right? So we capture these different flavors by asking multiple questions, right? So in the case of OrgLens, we ask 7 questions around the themes of expertise, trust, awareness, innovation, work, support, and energy, right? And decision making. So broadly speaking, how that works is, when we administer the survey, every survey respondent gets a question, something on the lines of, in the last 6 months, who have you reached out to get some expert advice, right? And if you have, say, 200 people responding to it, right, based on the responses that we get, right, every individual might mention some 6-7 names, right, of people who they go to for expertise. We are able to create a expert network or an expertise network, right? So that's the social graph of the organization from an expertise perspective, right? Similarly, when the other 6 questions also get answered, we get a pretty well-rounded social graph of the organization, and we are able to then do a network analysis on it, which is the second stage, right? So one, at a organizational level, we are able to see who's right at the center, right? Now, who is it that everybody looks up to? And more importantly, we are able to identify who are the folks who are not at the center, who are at the periphery, right? These are individuals who, for some reason or the other, are not integrated, right? Now, both of these observations are equally relevant, right? So people who are at the center are really force multipliers for the organization whenever you want to drive change, or for example, whenever you want to enable a merger or an acquisition, because these people have a disproportionate impact on the conversations that happen in the organization, right? So if a leader wants to drive change, instead of trying to reach out to everybody in the organization, she just needs to reach out to the top 10 influencers, right? Who are at the center of the network. And for 10% of the effort, you get the same benefit, right? Because these people are in a position to reach pretty much the entire organization. Likewise, if you're a HR leader and you want to figure out who are the folks in my organization who are completely disengaged, right? Then you look at the nodes at the periphery, right? So every part of this network tells a story. And based on that, tools like OrgLens can give specific targeted insights, saying that, if you want to drive change, leverage these people. Who do you need to target? These are the folks you need to target who are at the periphery of the organization. So the key point over here is, while intuitively we know that social capital is important, we know that networking is relevant. Using ONA, we are able to quantify that and give that to you as an insight, based on which you can not only get first level insights, you can also create models around those individual insights and have some sort of predictive capability as well. So you can get data that's a lot more future forward and not just based on things that might have already happened, right? So that's the process that we follow as far as social capital is concerned. Now, given that this is how we go about collecting the data and giving those insights, just to give you a sense of how some of those insights could be relevant for networks in an organization, I'll give you a few use cases, right? So a couple of areas are, for example, you have the tracking the effectiveness of a merger and an acquisition, right? You might have 2 organizations which are coming together. By identifying influencers in either of these places, you can fast track the effectiveness of that M&A by ensuring that at least the influencers in both places are getting connected early on, right? You have, identifying the centrality or identifying the centerness of each one of these nodes to say who are potential high potential employees, right? You can measure the level of inclusivity you're seeing in your organization, right? And you'll see that in one of these subsequent slides. You can track certain elements around operational excellence, like say level of collaboration, level of execution effectiveness using network analysis. And at a very high level, at an organizational level, you can also get a sense, is this an organization that's very hierarchy driven, where there's only one or two people at the center and everybody else is connected to them? Then there is also an element of subject matter expertise, right? It's not enough for someone to have some knowledge. You want to know if that knowledge is really relevant to that organizational context. And what best way to see that than to see how many people reach out to that individual for that knowledge. Because if that's happening a lot, then that means the individual has some real good value to contribute for that organization, right? And the same thing applies to leadership as well, right? Leaders, really good leaders, are right at the center of the network because everybody comes to them not just for transactional support, but also for mentorship, for advice, etc. And that in turn can help us with succession planning too, right?
Yeah.
So these are some of the high-level use cases.
But as a business leader, or even for that matter, as HR, the most pressing problem at any time, be it the Great Resignation era or not, would be tackling attrition. So something which is measuring things at a social graph level, how can it potentially solve for the number one issue which is there on every business leader's mind, which is fixing this leaky bucket of attrition?
Absolutely. So I think you hit the nail on the head, Nabeela. So attrition is one of the key primary issues that HR leaders look at. But the interesting part is, in a lot of ways, attrition is also seen as a business problem because there is a direct operational impact whenever there is an attrition, and therefore, in a lot of cases, attrition also gets tracked closely by somebody like a chief operations officer, right? Now, where ONA can help is for certain specific individuals, right? When you see attrition, there can be a disproportionate impact when they attrite from the organization because of how central they are, right? So what you're seeing on the screen is an actual attrition analysis that we did for an organization based on their network. So what we told them is, number one, there are certain individuals in your organization who are quote unquote vulnerable points, right? Why are they vulnerable points? Because the way they are structured in the organization, there's quite a lot of folks who come only to them, right? And if they were to attrite, suddenly you will have a lot of individuals who are disconnected from the larger cluster. So to illustrate that point, if you look at the green nodes in this cluster, right? These are individuals who I just referred to as vulnerable points, right? There are a whole bunch of other folks who are the yellow ones who are connected to them only. And without that connection, they will not be able to reach the larger cluster of blue nodes, right? And that makes these green nodes extremely vulnerable. And if they were to attrite, suddenly you will see a group of 5, 6, 7, 10 people who are either completely disconnected from the rest of the organization, or they are forming a small mini cluster that's disconnected from the larger organization, right? And that's disengagement, and that's something we want to avoid. So in this case, we actually had 2 people who had left the organization, right? Their name happened to come up in the survey. And we showed very clearly that because they left, especially if you look at the lower red node, right? When this person attrited, there's a group of about 10 individuals which overnight got disconnected from the rest of the organization. And we were able to show with this example to the leadership that you need to track these vulnerable employees very closely and make sure that they're engaged so that there is no outsized impact when they quit. Now, this is from an attrition perspective. If you look at it from a leadership progression, right? If somebody is moving from one level to the next, right? When they're moving to a different role, that's also attrition of a different sort, right? When someone moves to a different role, you need to find somebody who can be a worthy successor. Now, in the case of going back to that second right, the second red note that I was talking about, right? If this person had moved on to a leadership role instead of writing, you would have still had the same problem, right? You would have had to find an individual who is as well connected as this red node to ensure that you're not having that outsized impact of people getting isolated, right? So this kind of analysis is also important for succession planning, because for every leader, you need to see what is the kind of dependency the rest of the organization has on them to get connected to the larger organization, so that you can make sure that whoever is succeeding is equally well connected, if not more, right? So that's the attrition impact, as well as the succession planning angle of what we do in network analysis. And to a large extent, these same insights carry over to all the other elements of the benefits that you get from ONA, right? And one other case, or one other use case, sorry, if you can go back, Nabeela, is that in succession planning itself, when you were to find a replacement for that second node, in addition to saying that you should be equally well connected, this leader also needs to create opportunities for all these yellow nodes who are reaching out to him to form their own independent connections as well, right? So that's the redundancy you have to build into the network to ensure that whenever somebody is leaving or moving on to the next level, there is no dependency or there is no impact on the overall collaboration levels, right? And until you visualize your network like this, you will not be in a position to give those actionable insights, right? So here, when that second leader comes in and takes over that position, he or she should ask himself, okay, this is not a healthy situation where these 12 people are only coming to me to reach out to the rest of the organization. Let me invite them to participate in cross-functional projects, right? Let me invite them to get more exposure to the rest of the organization, so that one, they have that additional motivation of being more visible. Secondly, you have a much better collaborative or engaged organization, right? Yeah, so that's how the network analysis can help. The other angle to the same analysis is we can also analyze the amount of ask that is expected from individuals, right? So in all these 7 questions that are being asked, essentially people are saying that I go to this person for mentorship, or I go to that person for expertise, right? We are able to get a sense of how often is someone reached out to for these 7 themes, right? So while it is great that people are being reached out to a lot, that can also has a flip side. If somebody is reached out to a little too much, that's collaboration overload, right? And this is something that we hear about a lot, especially in the COVID times when everybody is operating online. There is a lot expected from individuals who are especially participating in cross-functional projects, and that can lead to collaboration overload. So while intuitively we all know that this is happening, when we do a network analysis, we are able to quantify it. So for example, here in this case, there are about 10 departments that we're looking at, and we tracked how many incoming connections the individuals in those departments are getting, and we plotted that, right? Now, the best thing about quantifying a network is you're able to get a sense of how much are people being relied upon, that is by measuring the incoming connections, and you're also able to track how much can they rely on someone else, which is based on outgoing connections. And we are also able to look at it contextually. Right? Let me explain. So here, while we are looking at data across 10 departments, we are not being prescriptive in saying that you have to have this level of incoming connections or this level of outgoing connections, right? Every organization is different. So we create a context by looking at the average incoming connections, and then we track each department to see how much beyond that average are people in that department, right? So so we use a basic statistical measure like a standard deviation or something on those lines. And for each department, for example, in this case, that first department was finance and MIS, right? We were able to go to the leadership and say, a lot of people in finance and MIS are particularly overloaded compared to the average, because a lot of they are being reached out to by many people, either for transactional support, like getting some invoice done, or for some mentorship, like how to structure a deal better or something on those lines, right? So you are able to give contextual inputs on, is there a collaboration overload happening, right? And that's just the first level. The second level is, if somebody is getting a lot of collaboration overload, that problem can become a lot worse if they themselves don't have their own network, right? So in that case, the amount of outgoing connections is low, right? So from a quantification perspective, the Q we are looking for is, who are the people who have a high incoming connections and low outgoing connections. So we algorithmically code that into the analysis, and that immediately identifies people who are being relied upon a lot, but who don't have their own support system, right? And they are candidates for burnout, right? Burnout means either that leads to an attrition, or that leads to some sort of direct or indirect effect on the wellness of that individual, right? So just to repeat, something like collaboration overload, burnout, or some are all very intuitive concepts, right? Everybody knows about that. But when you look at it from the context of quantifying those relationships, you're able to give numbers to them, and therefore identify specific individuals who are going through those issues, right? And that's the other advantage of doing a organizational network analytics or measuring the social capital that you're seeing, right? The third, and probably personally to me the most relevant flavor of ONA is assessing inclusion, right? And inclusion not just from the perspective of gender, but also from the perspective of relationship between leaders and non-leaders, or tenured or new joinees, right? So just to elaborate, right, if you look at it from the context of just gender, right, to start with, right, immediate insight that can be available is, at each level, how difficult is it for a man to reach out to a leadership vis-a-vis compared to a woman at that level, right? That can give you an immediate insight on what is the kind of tone and tenor of the structure in that organization, right? Is it a organization where women find it equally easy to reach out to a leader, either for some sort of transactional support or for mentorship, or does that organization put structural roadblocks which make it impossible for women to reach out for support? That's a very basic level of insight that's immediately available. The other perspective is, you can also analyze the networks of women leaders and compare them to the networks of male leaders, right? You can see, are men as inclusive in their networks as compared to women? That also is an indicator of how inclusive the organization is, right? And very interestingly speaking, in the past research or past instances where we've done an ONA, we've seen multiple instances where women are much more inclusive in the networks that they create, right? And that seems to be a very organic phenomenon that we've seen in the multiple studies that we've done, right? And from the context of inclusivity, another use case which is even relevant for people in operations is this concept of workforce integration, right? When people join an organization, or when two organizations go through a merger and an acquisition, you want to track people who recently joined the organization. How easy or difficult is it for them to quickly become productive, right? For them to quickly establish connections with everybody else in the organization, right? And that workforce integration then has a lot of trickle-down effect into other areas, like attrition that happens in the first 6 months or the first 1 year, right? Which is also a very specific metric that is tracked by many leaders, because any attrition that happens in the first 6 months is particularly expensive, because people don't get productive in the first 6 months, right? So in that area, you invested, but you've got nothing back, right? So that's why leadership spends a lot of effort into creating specific programs around ensuring that there are no attritions for new hires, right? And that can be something that is specifically helped by network analysis, because when you look at the demographics of the nodes in the network, you can figure out how well new joinees are getting integrated. So for example, if you can identify one new joinee who is well integrated and another who is not integrated, you can buddy them up, right? So then you create an ecosystem where people are similar to each other and therefore they're able to help. At the same time, one person has somehow figured out how to integrate better, so he or she can help the other individual. So it's a very systematic, number-driven approach to driving workforce integration, right? And that's another flavor of inclusion, right? So those are some of the very quick use cases on how ONA can be used across the organization, and we've tried to illustrate some of that with actual outputs that we've got from the past engagements that we've done. The key point here is to firstly visualize that social graph, right? Before getting into any insights, if you're a leader, just looking at that graph will give you a lot of insights of who are the vulnerable points, who's at the center, who's at the periphery. And then you can look at follow-up metrics, right? Like who are being dependent on too much by the rest of the organization and therefore experiencing collaboration. And within that, who are the folks who don't have enough of a support system, right? So they are leading to burnout and attrition or something even worse, right? So those are some of the use cases. So I'll take a pause over here and see if there are any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Nabeela and Togy. Let's hear if colleagues have questions. We have some time until past to entertain questions for clarity and etc. Yes, Sash?
Hi. You know what, and I'm going to generalize here, and being in my 50s, just take that into account, because I'm a different generation from a lot of the younger, talented people coming into the pipeline. But one of the experiences I've had in OD is where we have a particular value set. So, you know, Nabeela, you were mentioning at the beginning, like the Ubuntu, you know, the social capital kind of thing. But I don't want to blame Westernization or the type of educational systems we have now. But my observation is that there's a changing focus from this emphasis on social capital. And it's you find a lot of our youth are a lot more individualistic, you know, and self-focused, and it's like my career and my growth, and everybody wants to become the CEO and the MD and that kind of thing. And so that's definitely been a problem. And then also, look, we definitely have some succession planning issues, and that's also maybe it's the state of the economy as well, but it's also because of some of our HR systems, not all, are in like a here and now, you know, sort of focus. So as long as everything is okay now, things are fine. You find some of the future planning. So I can see where this tool can help a lot, but the one that's bothering me the most is how we can somehow mobilize some of our young people to sort of internalize more what many of us grew up with. You know, if you were a doctor, it was not written anywhere, but it was just an understood thing that when you qualify, you'll go back to the village and you do pull your years of, you know, serving poorer people for zero. That's now not so easy. So I'm just wondering, what experience have you had, maybe like to shift cultures, but you know, to appreciate the social capital?
Sure. I'm going to take a stab at it first and would definitely invite Togy to weigh in. The answer to this will be multifold, Sesh. And I'm going to try a philosophical underpinning answer to this. I just got fresh off of a session from Dr. Stephen Segal. He teaches at Macquarie University. We were just, OD Alternatives was doing a session with him. And, the last 15 minutes of the session, he spoke about the philosophy of German philosopher Martin Heidegger. He's the guy who has influenced a lot of philosophers from before his era. Up until his thinking, it was all of the philosophy and the philosophers were grounded in the thinking that man is a rational animal. And the way they access the world is by thinking. Okay. He turned that around on its head and he said that our access to the world is not so much by thinking, but it is by being, and it is by being involved with the people that we come across with. Not so much to say that we are irrational beings, but just being rational doesn't really, completely sum up our existence and the way we interact and process information. How that translates into the organizational context, allow me to explain. So if there is a change management exercise, rationally, we understand it might be for the better, right? We might know that there is either a burning platform or the company is losing ground fast to its competitors. So rationally, yes, it may make sense. All the numbers might line up and they may sort of really point towards the most right thing or the decision for the management to take. But do all people associated, employed with the organization process and react the same way? No, they don't. The way we process, the way we react is not completely from being rational. We all have our own, sort of subconscious biases or worldviews and fears, and how we may either be completely welcoming, not adapting. So we all have different ways of really welcoming that information or not welcoming that information. And which is why, to really quote several researchers which says that change management, when you really don't take people along, fails. Go beyond the rational plane of thinking and understand what it means to really, involve the minds and the hearts, which is really looking at the people side, not just the data. Looking at how do you really fire up the people in a way which makes the most sense to them. You're not really going to get too far ahead. You're not really going to get the bang for the buck of any of your organizational initiatives. So social capital, or how people react, how people behave in a structure, tries to quantify that for you. Sometimes I've used this phrase and it sits well with people, which is that it kind of formalizes the grapevine. And the grapevine is not just your rumor mills or gossip mills, but it's about how people are thinking, feeling, and processing the world, the organizational world around them. And if you miss that important element of information, you're bound to just operate from a very rational and number-driven plane, and that is not really going to yield the right results for you. I will submit my answer here and would definitely, have Togy and even Mishti weigh in.
Sure.
Right. So, just to build on what Nabeela said, so while she took the philosophical and strategic route, maybe I'll get a little tactical, right? So if I can take the example of the platform called Stack Overflow, right? It is by design supposed to be social, right? So, no, first thing I want to say is, I completely agree with what you just said, right? The element of someone being encouraged or coaxed into serving society has always been a problem, and I guess to a certain extent it will always continue to be a problem. But in the context of an organization, right, how do we encourage people to be social in the context of creating bigger networks or helping each other? One possibility is, now that we are doing a network analysis and quantifying the nature of the structure, what Stack Overflow does, which is very visibly complimenting somebody who has helped answer another question, or very visibly progressing somebody from a level 1 to a level 2 because they've answered 100 questions today, but 200 questions tomorrow, right? When we quantify the network structure, we are in a position where we can tell the leaders, hey, using this data, you can take a very quantitative approach towards rewarding people, towards going from a low social level to a high social level, right? Because the moment we quantify, it becomes a lot more easier to have a logical discussion around that, right? Of course, you can't force change, but you can give leaders the tools to have the conversation around that. A very tactical example around that could be, if you identify the top 3 influencers in a network, and if you put that somewhere on a leaderboard, right, and you refresh that leaderboard on a weekly basis, right, that in itself is a little incentive for someone to be a little more helpful to everybody else in the community, right? It may work for somebody, it may not work for somebody, but the point is, using the power of data, we are helping leaders have a logical conversation. So that's my 2 cents, Sesh.
Thank you.
Mishti, you have any points to add to what?
I think they have covered it all. In an organization, there's another culture that thrives in every organization, which is the offline culture. So one is the official culture, and one is the offline culture. That is the informal networks that are there in the organization. So even though if individuals are individualistic in their culture or context, they would by default gravitate towards informal networks and connecting with each other. Another concept is called sociometry and the social atom of any structure. So a lot of these principles also borrowed from psychodrama and sociometry and group dynamics, what Dr. Moreno talks about. So in order to really derive effectiveness within teams, within organizations, and even work towards change management, it is helpful and useful to study the offline and the informal networks, because that is going to be by default. People would engage in social interactions and connect with each other to get things done or thrive on energy or support or trust. So it is not something that can be ignored. It's there by default. That's the only thing I would want to add. So when you use data and when you quantify that, you have enough rationale to convince stakeholders to see different realities within the organization.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Mishti. Mativela?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Tsima. This is a very engaging presentation. I appreciate being here. I have a question around, maybe a comment before I get to my question. In South Africa, I've always suspected that there is not enough inclusion and all these things that this tool can help us measure. So I think it's a very good tool that we can use. The question is really around, how do you build a business case around selling this tool? What kind of inputs or drivers do you include in trying to sell it to a potential customer? That's one. And two, is this tool available? And this is a technical question. Is it available on the cloud where you can have the data for a particular organization and they can continue to use it in that way? Thank you so much.
Thanks. Togy?
Yeah, sure. So let me take the first question on how do we show the benefit to an organization of using this tool, right? So one thing you might have realized is while we create that social graph by virtue of the response to those questions, we also collect demographic information about the individuals, right? What location they come from, what is the geography, maybe what BU they work in, right? The reason why we are saying that is, let's take some typical productivity measure, like for example, revenue generated, right? Or number of lines of code, right? Now, because we are doing this inclusivity analysis in a very structured manner, and we have the demographic information, not only are we able to say how inclusive the entire organization is, we're also able to say, if you have 6 locations, what is the inclusivity in each of these locations? or if you have 12 business units, what is the inclusivity in each of these business units? And if you have some sort of productivity measure, which is per location or per business unit, you yourself can do that correlation and see if inclusivity is having an impact, right? Now, in a lot of cases, the answers may not be obvious, right? So in some case, you might be measuring inclusivity from a gender perspective, right? Which may be same everywhere, but there will be a change in the productivity that is being caused because there is not enough inclusivity between tenured folks and new joiners, right? So the question is, how comprehensive is your inclusivity measurement? But if it is comprehensive enough, then if you couple that with the demographic data of these with these employees, and if you have the productivity metrics for that demographic set of markers, you can do that correlation to see if there is a benefit of having an inclusive environment. And if you look at a lot of historical research that's out there, right, this is the fundamental value proposition that is given for any sort of inclusivity award that is given, right? So as part of that award survey that's done, more often than not, the survey ends up saying that organizations which are more inclusive tend to perform better in many operational parameters, not just revenue, but in terms of the attrition levels or how effective people are at work, etc. Right? But the possibility for correlating between inclusivity and some sort of a business measure is very much there, because at the end of the day, we are generating numbers around the network analytics, right?
Okay.
That was the first point. The other point, I guess the other question was the deployment. Is it cloud-based, right?
Right.
So yes, it is cloud-based. In fact, the entire process from the data collection right up to the data being presented to the dashboard is completely on AWS, right? Okay. So on our Amazon servers. So once you respond to that survey, which is also online, the data comes in, the calculation is done in an automated manner, and you get it. And the link that's provided can be accessed for perpetuity by the customer whenever they want to.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Togy. George?
Okay. The question I had is been asked, and that was, how would you go to market with this? How would you go to a prospect and say, listen, this is the product I have. How would you sell this? And so if you have a case of a major or demerger, at what stage would you do this? Is it as the company is talking, hey, we're going to demerger? And what do you take the dipstick then, or do you wait for this to happen? How would you sell this product? That's the question I had, but I think you've tried to answer it.
Sure. So just to understand the question, can you clarify what you meant by demerger? Is that an investment?
Okay.
Merger,
Yeah, okay.
demerger.
So a merger is,
okay, got it.
is where you buy, two entities are buying. A demerger is where you're letting go some. But
got it. Yeah.
I've had experiences of both, and in both instances, the official line from management is not what employees listen to.
Absolutely.
Unofficial line is what we all followed, and therefore, where does this tool play?
Absolutely. So to your first question, so the most basic requirement obviously is that there should be enough data to do the network analysis, right? So typically what we recommend is you should have a survey respondent pool of at least 75 to 100 people, right? We recommend 100 plus, right? But that's a transactional element. But to your question of how do we sell this, right? How do we position this to an organization? Now, in an organization, there are two perspectives usually. There is usually an HR head's perspective where they are quite keen on elements like engagement, inclusion, etc., which a lot of folks might consider as soft topics, right? But it's still relevant, right? And how this tool helps is to put a good amount of structure and quantification around those so-called soft topics, right? So if a HR head wants to create an inclusive environment, right? We say that because of that, if you go back to the slide that I showed earlier, we say that the environment is not inclusive because in 6 of the 7 levels, women have to go through an average 2.3 more hops to reach the leadership, right? So the data uses numbers to say that you're either inclusive or not inclusive, right? Another example is engagement, right? When we say that the organization is not engaging, we are saying that because almost 40% of your employees are either isolates, that is, they're not connected to the larger cluster at all, or they are part of smaller groups of 2-3 people who just speak to themselves, who don't speak to the larger organization, right? So that's one perspective, which is the HR head's perspective of looking at these soft issues, which we are helping quantify. The other perspective is the issue of is that of the CEO or the COO. And I remember the observation from Sesh in the last call that most of these folks tend to be accountants or engineers, right? So they love numbers, right? So we are able to tell them, we are able to quantify the benefit of having a well-structured network, going back to the previous question, because since we are quantifying these parameters, we can now look at your productivity measures as well, which is revenue, attrition, attendance, etc., and do an actual correlation. We can literally do a regression analysis or a correlation and say that looks like, if you look at per BU, then there is a correlation between inclusion and profits, between inclusion and attendance, right? So since we are able to tie operational parameters with HR parameters, that would be of interest to the CEOs and the COOs who have a very quantifiable way of looking at it. So if I were to position it to a customer, I would first try to understand who's my main stakeholder here. Am I speaking to the HR head to take the decision, or am I speaking to the CEO to take the decision? And I can, temper my approach accordingly. Does that make sense, George?
Certainly makes a lot of sense. Yes, thank you very much. Yeah.
Great. So basically, there must be a strong business case, number one, that we're trying to solve with this tool. And then, of course, secondly, as Togy say, we're making soft topics measurable. So we always say that soft topics are indeed very hard. So if you show them in numbers, they will be understood. And as I said last time, that this is a means to solving a particular problem. So the first point is you will know what issues the company is grappling with. And if there are issues of exclusion, there are issues of people having difficulty having access to the leadership, and yet they want to make a career in the organization. So you will help them to show them that they are very far removed. And I can imagine in a multi-region based organizations, the global organizations that goes beyond regions, where they never get to know what's going on there. This tool could really, really be very, very helpful in my view. So I don't know whether you, I'm wondering, Togy, in a situation where you have implemented this tool and people now become aware of this information, and you start helping the organization to close the gaps, does it have a tendency of changing the behavior of people? Do you tend to see people now that they are aware that they are excluded? Do they tend now to change, or are you saying that it will need on top of that the purposeful intervention of the company? In other words, does it change the behavior of people now once they become aware that they were not networking enough?
Yeah, so my short answer to that question is there is definitely a realization that the behavior has to change, right? And at an individual level, there is definitely a sense that I need to do X, Y, Z things to increase my network. But more often than not, the best kind of change is when the leadership chimes in and says, hey, we did this network analysis and we realized that, for example, inclusivity is not as much as we would have wanted to do. And they put in a combination of both online and offline measures to address that problem, right? So when the individual employees see that the leaders are also acting on it, that's when the effect increases by 2 to 3-fold, right? Because they know that if they try to improve their network, there will be a leadership support as well in making that happen, right? So short answer to your question, yes, people do change, but that change gets magnified a lot more if people see leadership backing it too.
Yeah, but Sam, unlike, and for the benefit of everyone else, unlike the engagement survey, or for that matter, an inclusion audit or a culture audit, this survey by default has names in it because it's mapping the social graph, it's mapping the connections and relationships people have with each other. So it is not an anonymous survey. To that extent, the results could be interpreted any which way, and we keep it close to only the 2 or 3 project sponsors who are looking at those network analysis results. What an individual gets out of this survey would just be a report which talks about how they are connected with all of their other connections and what is their position in their own immediate circle. So if they are very well entrenched or if they are on the peripheries, that information will not be privy to them, simply because it could just be processed in a very different way and people might jump to conclusions we wouldn't want them to. So it is typically shared with just the HR project sponsor or with the business leader for them to get an overall sense of what the patterns of relationships look like. Do they see a lot of decision making happening by default by the leadership? Do they see groups of people who share a common demographic being isolated and therefore being excluded? So those patterns are there for the business to see and for them to make those changes and make certain interventions which would help solve that problem that they are seeing. But the people, they themselves aren't, very clearly told that, okay, this is their position, that they happen to be in the excluded sector or in the very included sector. So that kind of privacy and that kind of, opaqueness has to be kept.
And I can imagine how empowering this type of information could be to a CEO of a very complex organization, because he might just be having so many people coming to him, but the same people all the time, and not realizing that there's a jewel somewhere out in the periphery, that if they brought into the periphery, they can actually strengthen their leadership.
Absolutely.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah. There's one more question in the chat that coming from Sydney. He's talking about what are the key points we should, as leaders, consider to be receptive to new employees and to encourage work integration. A lot of organizations' information sits on the computers instead of a common server where collaboration can be encouraged. So what is your view on that? I mean, Togy, I think a couple of weeks back, you had shared this very important nugget, which talked about the exact opposite, in fact, which said that a lot of the tacit information and a lot of the organization's wealth of knowledge is, in fact, in the minds of people. And it happens on non-recorded verbal conversations. So tacit information is, in fact, not recorded. And a lot of things you have to just learn by association, by talking to people. And that's precisely why an ONA comes into the picture, because unless you know who are the people you can tap into, from just understanding who are the subject matter experts or who are people who have a great handle and an awareness of what's going on, you can access the knowledge management portal or intranet of the company, and you may not get those pieces of nugget as well as you would otherwise get them if you knew who to tap into to get that information and become productive and integrate into your new work life faster. So in order to really enhance collaboration, in order for new hires to get well accustomed to the system, it's important to help them form those connections and help them connected to the right nodes in the network who will help them get absorbed faster.
Beautiful. Is there any one last question? Sydney, yes.
Follow-up question. The follow-up question. Thank you so much for the answer. I just want to know, in terms of the level of sharing of information within a group. Now that it's so difficult for information to be shared, can you just briefly just tell us about the kind of skills that those employees that are in the periphery can have in order to effectively share information for effective collaboration? Thank you.
The skills that the employees need to have. Well, even for that, I think in the last meeting we had touched upon, we do talk about the individual report that every participant receives gives a graph of how they happen to be in their own network with themselves at the center, what kind of connections they have. And then because the demographic information is already with us, when we give the information, it talks about how well are you connecting with people across the levels. So do the most of your connections, do they happen to be at a peer level, or are they also distributed equally across with people who are seniors, with juniors? Similarly with departments or with locations. So are you connecting with people more often than not that belong to the same function as yours? So once an individual has a map of their own relationships, then we give them, nudges or certain sort of action areas of how they can maximize their networks. If they really need to, if they have a very diverse network, we will tell them what are the advantages of it, but also what to watch out for. So if you have a very diverse network, you might be getting a lot of novel information and new stimuli all the time. But do you also have enough number of people who are similar to you, with whom you can process information, which is easier? Because if you interact with a certain set of people, let's say you're from finance, and if you have 3 to 4 finance colleagues that you're working with, by virtue of being in the same function, you will have a common language set and a common way of interacting and engaging with each other. You will get it. You will not have to really try too hard to communicate with each other professionally. But if you happen to have absolutely nobody in finance that you're connecting with, you have 2 connections from technology, one from R&D, one from marketing, one from operations, a lot of your time will just go in interpreting what is it that others are saying, because it's not really in sync with your line of work. So this is just to give you an example that, we tell people that, okay, if you have a very diverse set of connections, here are the ways in which it may work for you. Here are the things that you may need to be watching out for. If you have a lot of connections who are at your same peer level, it may get you a lot of credibility. It may get you to implement certain new initiatives because you need a lot of peer support. But what you may be missing out on, because if you have connections with people at the senior level, they groom you, they get you visibility, they get you access to higher level opportunities. So those are the elements that you may be missing out on. So similarly, even for receiving knowledge, or for that matter, transferring the knowledge, what kind of a network structure supports that? So individual reports are able to really help you, point and nudge you in the direction. They tell you what your as-is structure is and what are some of the steps you can take to really hone and shape and churn that network better for effectiveness, for personal effectiveness.
Great. Thank you so much, colleagues. We're running out of time. This is really insightful and we can really go on. But we're going to be in touch with each one of you. We will explore more how we can really help our clients out there and our businesses and our community. And thank you very much to colleagues, Mishti, Togy, and Nabeela. We really appreciate your time and enthusiasm in building this partnership with COMETSA and the broader associates that we have here. This is just the beginning. We will be sharing once again this link, video link from this conversation. Feel free to reach out to us, and we can reach out to our colleagues in India. All the best in India. It's the late afternoon or early afternoon for you. That side. Enjoy your Saturday, and we look forward to networking again and take the partnership forward. And thanks to the colleagues. We are now, in the next 10 minutes, going to be joined by Roger Hitchcock from the CIDA Group, which is the sister company of Contribution Compass. Actually, is the owner of the Contribution Compass. It's also a partner of ours, and we're going to look at the transforming enterprises through boards and directorship development. You can see we're now also wanting to talk to the big bosses, so we have to be ready to do that. Thank you very much. We'll see you in a few minutes, and goodbye to colleagues in India.
Sure. Thank you for the opportunity, Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Lovely meeting all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for your time.